Hello, amazing parents and caretakers, and welcome to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. I'm your family empowerment coach, Celia Kibler. I'm a mom of a blended family of 5 kids. I'm a grandma of 9 kids, an author, a teacher, a speaker, and a consultant with over 40 years of training and real-life parenting experience. I'm here to offer you practical, doable tips, strategies, and techniques that will pump up your parenting skills and create peace, love, and laughter throughout your family. In addition, I'll be interviewing some great humans that are on a mission to make your life a better, happier, and healthier life. So let's not waste any time and get started with the next episode of the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. I'm so excited for today's guest. Today's guest is Dr. Robert Melillo, a world-renowned expert in brain health, specializing in childhood and adult neurological disorders, a clinical professor, brain researcher, and best-selling author of Disconnected Kids. He focuses on ADHD, autism, OCD, tics, anxiety, and other developmental issues. Dr. Melillo is dedicated to bridging brain function, behavior, and physical health. His innovative multimodal approach, the Melillo Method, has transformed thousands of lives. Join us as we explore his groundbreaking work and unique insights into the brain. And I'm so excited because I just love talking about the brain and helping parents understand all about it in kids. So Dr. Melillo, welcome to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. I'm excited and thank you.
So before we get into some questions and all the explanation and wisdom that you have to offer, can you first tell everybody how they can reach you in case people can't stay on for the whole time, and what got you into this? What made you so passionate about the brain?
Sure. So drrobertmelillo.com is my website, and people can actually even make appointments with us. We have 2 centers here in New York, one in New York City, one on Long Island. They can go to info@drrobertmelillo.com. And they can go right on the website. Also, I have a very active Instagram, and we do respond usually to messages. And that is, really the best way to get in touch with us if they're interested in seeing us or coming in for an appointment. Obviously, I have a number of books out there, but as you said, Disconnected Kids, which is just in its 3rd edition. That's kind of the best way. From a standpoint of why, from the time I really started in my clinical journey, I was fascinated with neuroscience and the brain. I found that it was very interesting, and I wanted to be able to see if I could bridge almost like a sports medicine rehab approach with neurology. And that's been my journey since the beginning, but really getting into the development of the brain and looking at developmental issues started with, some family members and friends that struggled with various issues, and my own kids that struggled with different issues. But at the same time, were unusually gifted in certain areas. And so from the beginning, there was this dichotomy that I was aware of that parents were telling me about as well, that their children were really good at certain things, but were struggling with others. And when I first started researching this, the first concept I came across was something called unevenness of skills, where kids with ADHD or with autism or with dyslexia were not bad at everything. In fact, they were almost always recognized as being exceptional in certain areas and having difficulties in others. But nobody was explaining that at all. No one was saying or even looking at that as an explanation. And for me, because I had already known a lot about neuroscience and neurology and clinical neurology, I was teaching it. When my own kids were labeled with issues, my first question is, well, what is happening in the brain? And no one could answer that question. And for me, it seemed like the most basic question. And so then I eventually dove into it myself and connected with researchers around the world. And that's been, the last 30 years of my life, essentially.
And it's so, I mean, that would be my first question. So what's going on with this? But I think unfortunately, there's so much labeling going on with kids. There's, you know, and and I feel like many parents that I speak to almost assume something is going to be wrong with their child. They like
Right.
at the very earliest of ages, from birth to right up to one, they're like, well, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? When I coach and advise my parents, I actually don't give them milestones unless they ask. I will ask what their kids are doing and what they're able to do and how they're talking and sleeping and eating and all the basics, but I don't like to give milestones because they look at that as the law. Okay, if my child's not doing this, something must be wrong. And I feel like knowing more about the brain is so important and such a wake up to parents because they don't even know. Why are kids impulsive? They're impulsive because their developed brain doesn't include controlling impulsivity, and and then think, well, something must be wrong. So, in your knowledge, what explains all of these diagnoses, these a lot of diagnoses of children with all um, these autisms and ADD and ADHD and all these, they're not labels, but what people say they have at like enormous rates, it seems like. It seems like,
Yeah.
a huge statistics of kids that are on the autism spectrum that have ADD and have ADHD. And I'm always like, the nature of a toddler is ADHD. They can't stay on task. They're active. They don't keep focused. That is what a toddler is. So how do you kind of explain all this in this world?
Well, if someone's being diagnosed appropriately, first of all, and most kids with ADHD, they're not supposed to be getting a formal diagnosis till about 6 or 7. So you shouldn't be diagnosing toddlers with ADHD, at least. Autism, by its nature, is usually diagnosed by 3, or it should be. And so there you're looking at that. And so I think it comes down to, first of all, are we giving proper labels? But to go back to what you also said is that, talking about what's actually happening in the brain and the importance of milestones. When I get people that come from literally all over the world that have been to many of the supposed experts. And the first question I ask them is, did anybody explain to you what's actually happening in the brain? And the answer is always no, 100% of the time. And they usually say, until I read your book, I had no idea. No one ever explained any of this. And then it made perfect sense. Now, for me, milestones are hugely important. The problem is that, when people are given milestones, and then when they go back to a pediatrician, when they don't meet those milestones, they're told it doesn't matter. So they get this confused message. And that is a problem because, parents, where are they getting that from? I mean, if they're comparing their child to other children, that's okay, because you look at it and say, okay, my child isn't doing what this child is doing. And so they may get nervous about it. But the reality is 1 in 4 kids today will probably end up with a diagnosis. And the statistics are real. So everything that RFK has been talking about in the last several months, I wrote a book about all of this in 2013, which was really, starts off with the first chapter is, are we facing an epidemic? And then obviously, if we are, why? And what's happening? So I did a pretty extensive research and a deep dive into this and really spoke to some top epidemiologists and read, the records. And that was, up to 2013, but I've stayed up on it since. And I can tell you that it is absolutely clear that we are seeing an epidemic rise of real issues. So, and we do the research. So when we say someone has ADHD or autism, we're able to document that by looking at their brain and by looking at certain functions. Now, as we said, some kids may be mislabeled. Some kids may, many doctors and therapists, since they don't understand what the problem is, they just throw things at people. Like every adult has depression. Every kid with any sort of struggle has ADHD, and they don't realize that ADHD is a real thing, and there's a neurological, basis for it, and there are ways of actually identifying that. But in when you look at the rise of autism, for instance, going from 1 in 10,000 30 years ago to where it is now 1 in 31 or 1 in 32 or 1 in 20 something boys, that represents a real increase. But about 50% of that may be actually explained by improved diagnosis or maybe misdiagnosis or clustering effects, other effects like that. But at least 50% of the rise is not explained by any of that, which means that there's a real increase, that there is more kids now. And really the best way to answer this is just go to school systems. Go into the schools and ask teachers, are there more kids that have issues? And you will see that they will universally go, oh my God, you have no idea. And they're not even, like, I have a niece that is a coach and a gym teacher in a school. And she says, a lot of the parents tell me not to, their kid clearly is on the autism spectrum, and they're telling them not to say anything, not to mention that. They don't want to hear that. They don't want that label.
Right.
So most of the epidemiologists actually agree that all of these issues are actually underdiagnosed, not overdiagnosed. So when I hear somebody out there on like Instagram or something saying that ADHD isn't a real thing, that it's just, that kind of, makes me upset, because it's the wrong message. That what we should be doing is understanding why it is, how to appropriately diagnose it, and what to do about it. And what we want to give people is that for pediatricians, we want to train them that when someone does miss a milestone, you do need to pay attention to it, but there are solutions that you can give them right then and there when you understand these things called retained primitive reflexes.
And in milestones, you said that kids, adults, we all have strengths in different areas of our life. And like when I reflect back on when my daughter was little, she's now 43, she couldn't roll. She was a very big baby when she was born, and she couldn't roll over like the kid that she babysat with could roll over. And I was concerned with the doctor. And I don't think she rolled over till she was like 7 months or 8 months. And he was like, well, look how big she is. Do you know a 20-year-old that can't roll over? No. And so he said, well, don't worry, she'll be able to roll over. But she did eventually roll over. But at 8 months, she also started talking, and she could speak fluently like you and I and understand the English language at 18 months, and so it's like, where do parents understand that some things, kids will go at their own pace with many of these milestones,
I'm not a big,
and
I'm not
where
a
do
big,
you get concerned?
yeah, I'm not a big fan of that idea that, kids can develop at their own time and everybody develops differently. It's a very nice message, but it's not true when we talk about brain development, especially human brain development. Human brain development is unique amongst any brains. First of all, we have one of the most complex things in the universe, which is the human brain. To say that can be built in any way in anyone doesn't matter, right? Doesn't make sense. It's like, I give the analogy, if you, hired an architect, paid him a lot of money and said, design me the most beautiful home. And he did, and he comes back to you and you have this magnificent blueprint in your hand, and you go to a contractor and go, here's the blueprint, but don't worry, you don't have to follow it exactly, right?
Right.
I don't think you would
Good
say,
scenario.
no, follow it exactly. Like any deviation, this house may not turn out the way it's supposed to. And
Or
even
fall down.
beautiful blueprint, but it may end up like the, Leaning Tower of Pisa. And so for me, there's a very strict blueprint as to the way the human brain is supposed to be born. But what we do know is the ones that go off track the most are the ones that may be more gifted in an area. So you have to look at the totality, meaning that, you know, if somebody misses a milestone or has a red flag that way, it does mean something. And, you know, you have to ask why. And now you may end up and say that, okay, now 8 months, that's almost too early to be talking, right? And so you look at that and say, okay, when they're ahead on some and they're really behind on others, what does that mean? And that usually means there's this developing imbalance in the brain. And so these people that have these, they may end up having these amazing gifts. They may be really talented in an area or gifted, but then they may have these things that they struggle with. And, you know, they might be able to compensate for that. And maybe in childhood, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But then at 25, they might be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Or at 30, they may be diagnosed with bipolar and might be suicidal. So you have to look and say, okay, you know, there's a difference between looking and saying, you know, are they okay? I mean, they're really good at certain things, but they're really not really very great at others. And that's just them. And that's okay. But they don't, we need to look at this and say, is this struggle going to eventually overcome their weakness? And the idea is we want them to be in the best version of them. They may be incredible in certain areas. They may be geniuses in certain areas, but they may, you know, ever since I was a kid, I was always fascinated by the idea of there's a thin line between genius and insanity.
Correct.
And brilliant people, I used to love books about them that, you know, they're brilliant, geniuses, great. And then they end up, you know, drinking themselves to death or killing themselves because of, you know, something. And I always wondered, why wouldn't they just be happy if they were a genius, right? And so now I understand this really speaks to my research. You know, you can be a Van Gogh and you know, be unbelievable, but go through this manic phase where he would paint 10 paintings in a day and then kill himself, right? So that's why to say that, oh, it doesn't matter, it's okay, it's not a big deal, that, you know, they'll eventually grow out of it, they'll eventually walk, you know, that to me, you know, we want our kids to be the best version of themselves. And so for me, looking at, okay, is there a reason? And anytime they miss a milestone, it's almost always going to be because certain reflexes, infant reflexes, should be there at a particular time. And if they're not, then we can bring them on and we can get them back on track. But the human brain is unique because, you know, we have the smallest brain per body size. We have the largest brain per body size, but because we're bipolar, we have the smallest birth canal. So we have to keep our brain really restricted in the womb. Most animals, most of their brain is fully developed in the womb. So when they come out, they're almost full adult size. Like chimpanzees, their brains are 4 times smaller than ours and almost fully formed at adult size at birth. Wow. And they have a larger birth canal relatively. We have only about 20-25% of our brain. So that means that 80% of our brain growth happens outside the womb. That means anything that happens has a big impact. And we have the longest period of development and the higher level things that make us human, executive function, speech, nonverbal communication, happen at the end. So in the beginning, you may see little differences that don't seem like a big deal, but in the end result, it's going to have a really big deal. So we have to project forward and understand that the adult of the fate of the adult brain really is determined in the first 6 years. And if there's imbalances in the system, it may not show up right away, but it may really impact them later on in life. So, you know, that's why the cavalier attitude for me about, you know, like they're even saying in the CDC that crawling isn't a milestone anymore. To me, that's idiotic. Really? And it tells you that all we're doing is normalizing pathology, and we're not looking and saying, yes, but we are facing this real epidemic of childhood issues. And so, and the reason why they eliminated crawling as a milestone is because they statistically, the majority of children don't crawl in a normal way in the proper time. So therefore, according to a normal bell curve, most kids are not in the norm. So therefore, crawling is not normal. So they eliminated it, which is absolutely idiotic.
Yeah, sounds ridiculous to me. Sounds ridiculous. So, being a parenting coach and a relationship coach, I believe that the many of the methods that parents use to communicate to their children, to encourage them to listen or cooperate, because most parents will parent based on the generation prior and how they were parented. And I really encourage parents to learn like a framework, what should be included in the way they're parenting so that children are motivated to cooperate because they can be. What do you believe the way a child is parented? And I know the brain is the brain. How does that affect? Like, I have found that, I worked with a parent who their child had ADHD, or was diagnosed with ADHD, I should say. And I said, let's work together for 6 months so you can really get him on task and get these executive functions working and putting the things in place to help him to want to cooperate and want to, be his best self. How do you, and it worked. I mean, it was great. By the end of the 6 months, he was like a different child. But so how do you feel that that behavior that they're learning at home influences a diagnosis that could be made, without it?
Yeah, it's a very good question because it is complicated. But for me, the first thing we need to do is rule out, is there an underlying neurological imbalance? Because as I say to parents from the beginning, when they come to see me, I said, I'm not here to manage symptoms or to manage behaviors. We're here to look for the root cause and to try to correct that, right? That doesn't mean that behavioral management isn't important, but that's not our role right now. Even though my second book, Reconnected Kids, does talk about, again, some aspects of how to manage it as you're going through it. But so if a child, truly has ADHD or some other imbalance, then usually just managing behaviors doesn't work very well because you're not dealing with the root cause. But if you have a child that doesn't really have a clear-cut neurological imbalance, then behaviorally managing that really makes sense because that's the root cause. There's some way the parents is setting up their lifestyle. So the number one thing to me in that case is just both parents getting on the same page. I have that a lot of kids are getting confused messages. The father, like I always give the example of, let's say you have the father who wants their son to be a superstar athlete, crew cut, jacked, and, wants him to be like military style, and that's one. And then the mother who wants the child to be like a hippie artist, long hair, flower child, right? In our lingo, right?
Right.
So they both have completely different images of what they really would want for their child. And of course, what they should want mostly is what their child wants, right? But we all have these images of what our kids are going to be like or whatever. And it's not that either one of them are wrong, but they don't tell one another. Right. And they never have this discussion. So now they give this child completely different messages on who they're supposed to be and how to make them happy. And so if the boy is like what the mother wants, the father's not happy. And then if he's like the father wants, the mother may not be happy and say, no, don't do that. And that in and of itself is going to create behavioral issues because that's going to create anxiety. That's going to create anger and frustration. So that's the one thing. And I think having structure, having rules, where I tell people, if you're going to go play a game, let's say you're going to go play a game of basketball with a group of people, and one or two people decide I'm not going to play by the rules of the game. I'm going to pick it up and run with it. I'm going to throw it at other people. And what happens? Is the game fun? No, it's not fun anymore, right? And so, we need rules. We may need
Right.
rules at home that we say, this is what we do. This is who we are. These are our values. And if in basketball, if you foul somebody, there's a penalty for that. There's a consequence for that behavior,
Exactly.
just like in life. And that's the point. I think we should be preparing our children. But let me ask you a question because you're an expert. What do you feel about? Because right now, what I see is a lot of the movement towards gentle parenting, towards not giving any consequences at all, not ever saying, speaking harshly to the child in any way. And that's a lot of what I see. And I'm curious as to if you see that and if that's and what your feeling is.
So I believe that that is the interpretation of what many parenting experts will tell people what they're hearing. And the truth is, it's like when people ask me, what kind of parenting am I do I do gentle parenting or, calm parenting or whatever? And I always say I do respectful parenting. If I'm going to label it, my bottom line is respect and will always be respect. And there is a framework for parents, and it includes limits and boundaries, and it absolutely includes consequences. And parents that want to always make their kids happy, I mean, I get it. I have 5 kids. I want them to be happy too. But if you are always trying to make them happy, you are creating a very unhappy adult. Because welcome to life when things don't go your way. And if children don't learn to understand that sometimes things don't go your way and that that's not a big deal, then they won't have that emotional intelligence as they move into adulthood. They won't have that regulation. I also believe that there should be an encouragement system. You should want to encourage your children to cooperate and to get involved and to do things because encouragement always works better than threats. If you don't do this, this will happen. If you do this, we're going to, get this done. Let's finish up what we need to do and then let's go to the pool or whatever. That is, in the workplace, if a boss comes up to you and says, hey, if you get this work done, as soon as you're done, that's it, go home early. Or it comes over and says, if you don't get this done in an hour, you're fired. What's going to motivate a person? Oh yeah, let me go home early. I'm fired. Well, who cares what I do? It's not going to inspire you to do your best. And children and adults should always be inspired to do their best because
Right.
I always say the result is irrelevant. As long as you're doing your best, like in grades, grades should not be prioritized. The children working hard and doing their best should be because you can always affect the outcome by
Right.
reviewing and changing and doing things and helping. Like you study for that spelling test. What can I do to help you to get? I understand you wanted a better grade. Well, let's see what we can do to do that different the next time. But you have to have all those things in place. You have to have limits and boundaries. Children that live in chaos and have no limits and boundaries are chaotic, and they're aggressive and they don't know what to do because, again, going back to our little underdeveloped brains, they don't have the brain power to sort them. Parents that let kids run their houses. You can't let a toddler run your house. They don't have a clue. They don't even have like half of what you have. Yet they don't even know logic and reason. Well, logically, we should be doing this. They don't have that. So yes, I totally agree that you have to be realistic. I am all about, getting parents to remove the need to yell as I work with them, because I think a constant yelling and aggression is what causes violent, raging adults, and also what causes adults that don't want to have anything to do with confrontation and second guess themselves all the time. There's many results that come from it. But the truth is, if you have a framework in place, a foundation, a system, as a parent, you're not parenting from the seat of your pants. You actually do create kids that
Right.
want to cooperate, want to be kind, want to be compassionate, and feel appreciated.
Right.
Hi, this is Celia, your host and family and relationship empowerment coach, and mom and grandma, here to take a break from this podcast to give you a special opportunity. As parents, we all have those moments. The pressure builds up, the noise gets too much, and before we know it, we're raising our voices higher than we ever intended. But what if there was a better way? Introducing 21 Days to Stop Yelling at Your Kids, a revolutionary program designed to help you communicate with your children without yelling. Imagine a home filled with understanding and respect, where your words have impact without the need to raise your voice. Created through my over 40 years of experience, this course offers you practical, easy to implement strategies that work in real life. You'll learn through interactive lessons, engaging exercises, and a supportive community. No judgments, just guidance. Because being a parent doesn't have to mean you're perfect. It's about growing and it's about becoming intentional. In just 21 days, life will be calmer and more harmonious. What if you don't get the course? Where will you be in 21 days? Still feeling like a bad parent? I encourage you to join the millions of parents that I have helped who have found a new path to communication and connection. Visit quityelling.com to enroll in the 21 Days to Stop Yelling course today. And for our podcast listeners, use the code PODCAST for a 60% discount. Quityelling.com, because love speaks so much louder than yelling. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Yeah, and I think that, with that, again, sitting down and in a calm way, discussing with the family what rules are, like, what do we do? What do we expect? What are you going to do? And even getting them to agree to it, to even write those rules or say, yeah, this is reasonable.
Absolutely.
And then actually talk amongst each other about, well, what happens if you break the rule, right? What do we do? And it's funny because if you ask kids, in my experience, in the right situation, they'll tell you the best way to motivate them, right? They'll tell you the consequence they don't want or the reward that they do want, right? They'll tell you. And then, now they've been part of this and they're actually even talking about, what the penalty should be.
And they're offering their consequence.
When it comes about, you don't need to yell. You just need to say, listen, buddy, I'm sorry. You remember we sat down and we discussed these rules. And remember, we talked about if you broke the rule or, this would be the consequence. And, I'm rooting for you, but, the rules are rules. And this is what we all agreed to. So now, you don't go out tonight or you're not going to get that reward yet or whatever, or, whatever it is. And if you do it, okay, great. Let's go, wherever. And let's go out to dinner with the family, which is what you wanted, whatever it could be, or let's go to the amusement park. That's what you wanted. And the other confusing message that I tell parents all the time is, if I ask a parent, what's your wish for your child? What do you want them to be as an adult, right? And all of them are going to say, I want them to be happy. I want them to love their work. I want them to be passionate about life. I want them to be in love and
Right.
be.
Kind. They always list kind.
I want them to be, healthy mentally and physically. Very rarely do parents right off the bat say, "I want them to be rich." They'll say, "I want them to be able to, to not have to worry about money," right? And then, they go through this litany of things where they want these, kids to be, healthy physically, mentally, not on any drug medications. And then I'll look at them and say, are you that?
Right.
Right? Are you that?
100%.
You have that? Do you have a great relationship with their mother or their father? Are you healthy mentally, physically? Are you in a career that you love? Are you passionate about your work? Are you on any medications for any reason? And if you are, and that's not to be judgmental, it's saying that understand that you're providing the example. That's a confusing message. You're telling me to be this way, but yet you're not that way.
Right. You have to do what you're asking them to do.
Exactly. You have to embody that. And I think bottom line is that most kids are wired from the beginning to, really want their parents to be proud of them. They want the parents to be happy. And I think if they're not, there's one of two reasons. One is there's a neurological imbalance and they have no control over it. And their brain is, you need to be able to intervene. But the other is, as a parent, they need somebody like you. They need to look at it because if you have a kid that's really disrespectful and, not listening to you and there's no neurological imbalances, what you're doing isn't working. There's
Right.
something, there's a lot of conflict between the parents. There's really confused messages. There's a lot of yelling and screaming, or there's no consequences for anything. And this child is screaming for structure in their life.
Right.
Because when you don't have rules and structure for a child, it actually creates anxiety.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
when they're in charge of the house, they know they're not supposed to be. Like they know, like they're wondering where's the parent, and they're looking for a parent, but you're letting them do whatever they want, and they're ruling the household, and they can do whatever they want, and they're kind of like, wait, I'm scared. This shouldn't. I'm not. I shouldn't be in charge here. But they're not going to come and tell you, oh, parent me better. You should actually give me consequences for doing something. No, they're just going to keep on acting whatever way they're going to act.
Exactly. And the whole thing you said with being the person you want your kids to be, that's so important. And modeling, calm communication. And I tell parents like if something if your child is doing something wrong because of the way the brain development develops, you not only have to just say, no, this is not a proper reaction to whatever they're upset about, but then you also have to teach them a better way to understand that emotion. One of these things that I actually really do not like in the language of parent experts these days, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can tell me, but is when they say this is a big emotion. They have big emotions. Well, if they have big emotions, what are the little ones? Like emotions are just emotions. There's not good ones, there's not bad ones. They are simply emotions. What can be counted as good or not so good is the way we respond to those emotions. And so if your child's having a tantrum, and people call that a big emotion, it's not an emotion, it's a response. And the way tantrums continue, and I always say this, they start out because it's our subconscious reacting to being told no or getting something taken away or something not working out because little guys don't know how to respond to emotions, but they continue because it works. And as long as there's not some kind of neurological
Right.
disorder, I don't even know if disorder is the right word, but for most parents, they give into it. Yeah, I just had a conversation with one of my parents the other day. She's like, I know I shouldn't give into it. No, you should not give into it because you're only teaching that child that when they rage and get out of control and get mad and cry and throw a fit, boom, they get their way. So it works every time. Why wouldn't they do it?
Reinforcing it. Yeah. Yeah. So, and to speak to that, because there are, 6 or 7 what we call categorical emotions, and there are individual networks for each emotion in the brain, right? So, left brain emotions are basically joy, pride, and anger. The right brain emotions are sadness, fear, which again can manifest as some levels of anxiety, shame, embarrassment, guilt, which again can lead to a lot of social anxieties,
Right.
as well as empathy, and very love and connection. So, and sadness. So these right brain emotions. And so when I look at, let's say, mental issues like depression, like what is depression? When the right brain, creates too much sadness and too much shame and too little joy and pride, that is the definition of major depressive disorder right there, right? So there are these emotional imbalances. And if you're seeing emotional dysregulation in a child or even in an adult, it can be, why would someone need anger management? Well, if the left brain is too high and the right brain can't suppress that, then they may have these bursts of anger. But as you say, there can also be behavioral reasons for that. But understanding that at the root, there are specific networks for every emotion in the brain. And one of the most important things I think that we're talking about that people don't really talk about in neurological terms, but the thing that you should be most concerned with building in your child is something called resilience. Resilience is the prevention for trauma. And we know that when we look at someone, I'm sure you're familiar with the adverse childhood experience study that was done years ago. And it looked at, these 10 basically traumas that children could be exposed to. And if they had 4 or more, they had a 400 to 1,200% increased risk of all different types of health issues like diabetes and cancer and obesity, and as well as depression and anxiety and suicidality. And they died 20 years earlier on average, right? So what's the antidote to that? There's an ACEs scale that we have people fill out, but there's also a resiliency scale. And if your resiliency is high, then the ACEs score doesn't matter as much. And so my fear right now in the kind of modern parenting style that I see is that by not giving them consequences, or by not making them do things for themselves, by, like you said, trying to make their life totally happy and joyful all the time, and not allowing them to ever struggle, what you're doing is you're not building resilience.
Right.
You're setting them up is for trauma later on in life. We all have experiences. Only 15% of soldiers get PTSD. Why not the other, 85%? Basically because they have a healthy nervous system and they have better resilience. They're exposed to the same horrors of war.
Right.
Doesn't traumatize them for the rest of their life.
It's an interesting statistic.
A certain level of threshold. And when you don't build resilience, your threshold for trauma is low. Almost anything can traumatize. I think we see this with these people now that get so offended so easily at things.
Yes.
And they literally start screaming and get traumatized by it. It's like, wait, it was a joke. Or, all right, someone said something mean to you. All right. I mean, that happens, and yes, we prefer it doesn't happen, and we're not going to. But how is that traumatizing you for the rest of your life? It's because you don't have any resilience. And I blame that mostly on the parents.
And I love that you said that too, because absolutely children need to learn to be resilient. And I think another problem with modern parenting is that they think everything is trauma. They think,
Right.
oh, if I tell my child they can't do this, they will suffer trauma. If my child picks up something and it's not the right thing and I have to take it away and I have to, give them something else, that's trauma. They should
Yeah,
just pick up whatever they can. And the truth is, you are creating, like you said, the trauma for the future by not doing these
right.
things.
Exactly. Exactly. That's very well said. That's really important because, they're so worried about that and they don't realize that they're going to have the opposite effect. It's kind of like, since COVID, what drives me crazy is I see a lot of the parents or grandparents coming in and putting antibacterial on their kids' hands over and over, like right away. I had a mom that the grandmother, and again, she's a wonderful person and
Right.
she's
It's
doing,
well intended.
but like I'm with this baby, like an 8 month old baby. And every couple of minutes she would put this out. And I said to her, please, you got to stop that. I can't, like, I just can't let you do that. You don't understand that the way you build an immune system is by being exposed to germs. And that's how you build resistance to disease. And by building resilience is how you build the resistance to trauma.
Right.
And so what's happening by sanitizing the world, you're actually lowering this child's threshold to get sick and to get allergies. And you're making their immune system weaker. If you, again, avoid any conflict with your child and don't let them struggle, but also resilience is a right brain function.
Right.
Trauma lives in the right brain. The strength of the right brain, which is really when we look at something like autism or true ADHD or OCD or tics or schizophrenia or some forms of anxiety, that is a right brain deficit. And we live in a world that builds the left brain. Everything technology, our academics, almost everything right now. You look at a phone and a video game, and it's building your right brain. These addictive dopamine driven networks. And as you do that, you lower the right brain. Parents trying to get their child to read too early actually is not good.
It is
It's
not good. Thank you. Thank you, doctor, for stating that. I tell people that all the time.
You need to build that right brain, and the right brain should be built in the first 3 years by a child being outside, running around, rolling around in the dirt, playing with other kids, playing with animals, using their body, learning about interpersonal relationships, learning how to read other people's body posture, and having fun, enjoy, and really playing. That's what builds the right brain. It doesn't get built by computers, by technology, and it actually stunts that growth. And ultimately, the growth of the right brain is what's going to lead to emotional regulation, attachment, how you're going to build every relationship for the rest of your life in men or women is going to be built really in that first year of life. And also resilience, your level of being susceptible to trauma. So that's why we shouldn't let children really be on computers or with technologies for the first 3 years while the right brain. We shouldn't try to get them to read before that period of time. We should let them just move around, play, interact with them, touch them, let them be creative, use their imagination, and let them fail and let them figure it out. And
Yes.
that builds emotional intelligence, which really is the key to life. In neuroscience, we say that the left brain gives you success academically, the right brain gives you success in life. And right now, parents start out by, okay, my child is born, they have to go to Harvard. I have to start treating them, teaching them right now. And it's all left brain driven stuff. And what you don't realize is maybe they'll go to Harvard, but they may struggle for the rest of their life with feelings of trauma, or they may never be able to meet somebody. The number one thing when I have parents And I work with, a lot of non-speaking autistic kids from around the world. I mean, that's about as difficult as it gets for parents, right? And when they come, their main concern universally, no matter what country they come from or language they speak, they say, my biggest concern is, will my child know love? Will they love somebody, and will somebody love them back? And the ability to do that is all your right brain. And so that's what makes somebody happy.
Right.
Not getting a Harvard degree and making a lot of money. It doesn't. It's the right brain emotional intelligence that we need to be building.
That's absolutely true. And so many people will say to me, well, if I love my child too much, will that spoil them? And I'm like, no, love never spoils a child. We need love. We need to know somebody cares and someone's keeping us safe, and we need to be hugged numerous times a day and kisses and all of that snuggling. What spoils a child is giving them everything they want when they want it, the minute they want it.
That's the
That's
thing.
what spoils a child.
Ask them how they define love, right? Some people, they define love by wrapping their child in bubble wrap, covering them in antibacterial cream and sunscreen, and protecting them from anything that could hurt them. They think that's love, right? So that's
Right.
where you have to define love. Love, and in that case, love will hurt, right? Because
Exactly. That is true.
well, you need to be able to say to them, okay, well, how do you define love? Actually, sometimes the best love is doing nothing and letting your child fail. Can you see that as love? Right. And that's so, because listen, for every parent,
Right.
we die when our kids fail. We die when they hurt themselves. We want to protect them from any good parent is like that. But you know that if you love your child, you have to let them fail.
Right.
Have to let them fall and skin their knee or burn their hand on a stove. You don't do it on purpose,
Right.
but you have to let them experience life and figure it out. That
And
is,
learn from it. Yep.
yeah, because ultimately, what a lot of parents don't think of is, what are you trying to do? What's your job? In any sort of manifesting, I always say, look at the outcome. Like, what's the outcome at the end of this that you want? What's the end of this story look like? And that's your child as a full grown adult, maybe married with their own family. What is that going to look like? And are you building them for that? Or are you building them only with childhood in mind? And you're going to keep them a baby forever, right? Which I think is what's happening a lot right now.
Yeah, I do. I always tell parents we're raising adults, not children. They're already children. Our job is to raise that self reliant, self confident, loving, kind, respectful, resilient grown up. That's our job. And, I even start parents, like you said, I talk about having weekly family meetings, 15, 20-minute meetings to connect, to talk about things, to, really work on projects as a family, to create the family vision right off the bat. I do that first thing with my parents. What are your expectations? Because a child will live up to whatever that expectation is. You know,
Right.
if you are constantly calling them lazy, guess what? They'll be lazy. If you're
Right.
constantly saying, "Oh, you're a liar," they'll stop telling the truth because why bother?
Right.
And it's so important.
Yep.
Gosh, Dr.
Yep.
Melillo, I think this is the most important podcast ever. I think that's what I'm going to name it. The most important podcast you should listen to today. Well, I mean, we could go on and on. And, I know you have things to do and our listeners have things to do. And we're so grateful that they stopped by and stayed on with us. And please leave a comment if you found this valuable. But even more importantly, please share it out to someone else because there's so much to be learned in this short amount of time. But Dr. Melillo, would you please offer one more piece of advice? I know we mentioned so much, and so you can repeat something we already said. But is there one more thing that would help parents kind of navigate this world of um, labels and neurology and neuroscience and the brain itself that really will help them help their kids.
Well, I think in a mixed message right now in the world because we know there's this neurodivergent movement, and part of it is great, meaning that we want to accept people who are different and treat them kindly, and that's always should be the message, right? But I think the mixed message is that the idea that it doesn't mean we can't do things to help them improve or that we can't do things to you know help them with what they're struggling with, and that there is a neurological basis that can be changed. That person, they have personality traits that are always going to be there and they're good. But if they have an imbalance, that's something that can be changed. And we can eliminate those weaknesses without taking away their strengths. We get kids that can't speak but are geniuses with their left brain, and we can get them to speak without losing that genius. So we just want the best version. And parents' roles, I think, at this point, they're told, well, just accept the child, leave them alone. This is who they are, and just accept that. If they're struggling and you believe there may be a neurological reason, your job is to help that. And that you can help that while accepting and loving your child and without changing them, but with allowing them to become the best version of themselves. And so I think that's very important that people need to understand that by seeking help for your child, you're not basically sabotaging the neurodivergent, mission that's out there. And I think both things can happen and coexist.
I 100% agree. And I think with mental health and brain function and brain knowledge, I think part of the problem is like if these children fell down and broke their arms, they would fix their arm. They wouldn't just let their arm be broke. Okay, well, now you have one good arm and you have one arm that's broken. Learn to deal with it. You would
Yeah.
never do that. You would fix the arm. And I think people don't think the same about mental health and they
Right.
don't think about its importance.
That goes back to actually the doctors don't understand what is actually happening in the brain. Right? The first question that I talked about, and they're not relating that to people because they themselves don't know. And that's where a lot of my work is out there trying to educate people.
And I'm so grateful for this conversation. And I hope you'll come on again. I feel like I have so much more to talk about with you. So hopefully, maybe we can have another part two of this. So if you would like to reach out to Dr. Melillo, and absolutely reach out if you have any questions or you want to know more, because he's the man to reach out to. You want to get the best of the best. Here you have the best of the best. And you go to your website is drrobertmelillo.com. Am I correct?
Yep.
Yes. So
Yep.
please reach out, or your Instagram. Is your Instagram a different name or the same name?
At Dr. Robert Melillo, at Dr.
Okay.
Robert. And we have over 1 million people on my Instagram. So, we have a pretty good following. We do a lot of information out there. So, yeah.
So get it. Find the information, reach out, connect with him if you need to, but you may just find the answer you're looking for right on, Instagram and hopefully with this video because this podcast, because it was super informative. Thank you so much for being here. I am eternally grateful.
My pleasure. It was great.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I thank you again for being here. And I hope we have part two. And to all of you out there, please, please get the help you need, whatever it's relating to. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of courage. Go get and strength to go get the help you need and your child needs. Don't judge yourself, don't shame yourself. If you're wondering, ask. If you think you need help with something, investigate that because you'll find out that it's going to improve life for all of you. So I thank you for being here. I thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to hang out with us. And as always, I wish you days filled with peace, love, tons of laughter. Really is the best medicine. Here's all the medical doctors. I bet Dr. Melillo will tell you, you need to laugh more. It's very important. Laugh at yourselves. Laugh at people. Stop taking the world so seriously. And we'll see you here next time on the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. If this episode was helpful to you, please share it with a friend and leave us a review that will help others. Wonder why kids don't come with a manual? Well, wonder no more, because I wrote you one, and it's just won a wonderful Mom's Choice Award. Go to celiasbooks.com and buy your copy of Raising Happy Toddlers, as well as my children's books. I appreciate you being part of my mission to help 10 million parents stop yelling at their kids. Please be intentional and hug on those kids of yours. See you at the next episode.